What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Crew 2, and in this video I'm going to take a look at the Ferrari 599XX Evo. This car also did receive the handling update recently on the game as well, so I did want to take another look at this thing. And well, surprisingly guys, I really do feel like Ubisoft is onto something with these settings. I mean, it's kind of insane how much better these cars actually feel. Now, I'm sure a lot of players might be wondering what cars might be better than others and all that good stuff, so one thing I do have to admit is I don't think the 599 is going to be the best touring car in the game. I would also argue this car is going to be one of the better ones as well, at least compared to many of the other ones. One thing I do also have to admit though, I would say the 599 is a really awesome looking touring car. Like, even though this thing might not be the greatest, my goodness, this Ferrari looks absolutely insane. So, as with the other vehicles as well in the handling update, I really haven't driven these cars all that much, so I also wanted to take this thing on a top speed test. So it turns out this vehicle is going to be a little bit slower than something like the BMW. The Z4 GT3 did around 255 miles an hour, and after testing out the 599, I noticed this car is going to hit around 251 miles an hour, so it's going to be a little bit slower. But again, guys, on many of the tracks in the game, I really do feel like a top speed on some of these vehicles is really not going to matter all that much. The main reason is many of the tracks really aren't big enough for them to hit that high crazy speed anyway. I feel like one of the most important things with the touring cars is probably going to be their overall speed more than their top speed, like the way they can fly out of a corner and or accelerate really easily. I feel like if the car has to shift all the time and or it might have some type of flaw to it where it doesn't accelerate as quickly as some of the others, then that's definitely going to be a bit of an issue with them. But luckily with the Ferrari 599, I was finding this car to be pretty dang fast for the most part. Do keep in mind, guys, even compared to something like the Z4, once again, I would honestly say that's probably one of the best touring cars in the game now, which honestly might be kind of insane, but the 599 is going to be a 7-speed compared to that car being a 6-speed, so you will find yourself shifting this car a little bit more often than you probably want to. I was finding myself misshifting in the beginning of races because I was not expecting it to redline as fast as it was. This really isn't much of an issue, it's more of the fact of trying to get used to it because you probably don't drive the car that often. But even then though, I feel like this car is still going to be really good for cornering. Obviously after the handling update, I feel like many of these vehicles are way more improved than they were before. For example, their stability is going to almost be like top tier, the way they can basically maneuver on the track. And I feel like getting into the racing line on many of the corners is going to be a lot better now. Not only that though, after adjusting the 599 just a little bit, I was finding this car not to spin out as much. At least that's what I was noticing with it. I really don't think I saw anybody run this car back in the day. Even though this thing might look insanely good, many players are probably not going to pick this thing over like the Renault or even the CCGT because it's just not as good, which I can definitely understand that. But now, guys, after this update, I really do feel like the 599 is going to be something to mess with. Sure, it might not be the best touring car in the game and or compete with something like the Z4. I would still say the 599 is definitely going to be worth a look because I do like the way this car does handle. Not only that though, it also is going to sound absolutely insane while doing it. I love the sound of this car, my goodness. And at least you can still compete in summits and stuff like that. Sure, like I did mention before, the car might have some flaws to it. Let's be honest, many of the vehicles in the Crew 2 definitely suffer from a lot of flaws. They might be really good, but they also have things about them that are honestly not so good as well. But luckily the 599 is going to have way better handling than it did before, so I was finding this thing to be a lot more fun going around corners. And one thing I was also noticing as well is, yes, this thing might be a 7-speed, but I was able to find a good gear going around many of the corners with it, so the car would still fly out of them. And depending on what gear you were in, this car would honestly rocket right out of that corner as well, so it's definitely something to consider. One thing I did notice though, guys, is depending on how sharp the turn was, I was finding this thing to be a little bit better in a higher gear. So for example, if you're approaching a really tight turn like a hairpin or something, which you guys will probably see in the race I was doing in the background, I noticed this car was actually a little bit better in 4th gear. Yes, it might have been like lower in the RPM, so you might be losing a little bit of power, but luckily that's nothing the nitrous can't solve, especially when you guys are flying out of the corner. Now, one thing I was noticing about this, now let's say you guys went around that corner in third gear, I was noticing the car might slightly spin just a little bit and or lose traction, and then when I would go around that exact same turn in fourth gear, I was finding the car to be so much better. It honestly is kind of weird being a lower RPM with the car gripping a lot more, but then again, one of the big positives about this though is I was finding myself getting up to speed a little bit easier. That way you don't actually have to shift. At least when coming out of the corner, if you guys were in third, you will have to shift into fourth. But if you go around that sharp turn in fourth gear and use the nitrous a little bit, I notice you can come out of there with a lot more power. So it's definitely something to consider. I really do feel like this Ferrari is going to be a really good car in the future. I feel like more players might end up starting to use this thing. I will definitely be testing this thing out in more summits in the future as well because I do feel like it's pretty good. Sure, the top speed might be a little bit lower on it, which if you guys were doing like a US Speed Tour event, then I would say that top speed might honestly be a bit of an issue, but even then though, I would say the 599 might be able to outperform many of the other touring cars in many of the US Speed Tour events, for example like the cornering. I really do feel like that's going to be a really big plus as well because sure the car might be insanely fast, but if it can't turn, honestly what good is it, and or the stability, so you might not have a lot of confidence in that vehicle if you are racing that thing. Sure, it might do 265 miles an hour or something, but if you can't go around a corner, I feel like the 599 is going to really jump out in that aspect because it really does turn nicely. I'm honestly really impressed with the way Ubisoft is doing this handling update. Like, I cannot wait to see what it's going to look like on many of the other vehicles in the game. I also mentioned this in the Z4 video as well. Like, having a bunch of different cars to use in the touring class I really do think is going to make it a lot more fun. It's also going to greatly mix up, I guess, the quote-unquote meta in the game as well, because many players might be testing out other vehicles. Like maybe you guys might be testing out the 599 in a summit, and this car might be insanely good. You can also score very close to like something like the Renault or something like that. So I really do think it's going to be something to look at. What's also kind of funny as well is I have been noticing a difference already in the leaderboards on many of the events I have been doing, like for example testing out the 599. I have been noticing like the Z4 popping up a lot more now, and I've also been noticing the 599 in some leaderboards as well, so I would definitely say guys, having these cars being updated is going to make these classes a lot more fun and also give players a lot more confidence when actually racing them, which I noticed that immediately. Like the second I jumped into the 599, I was like, my goodness, this car already feels really nice. Like basically going around the first corner, and obviously the AI are trying to destroy you anyway in some of these events, which has anyone else noticed some of the AI in these races really have no chill whatsoever? What's kind of funny is the fastest car in every single touring race that I did is normally the Lamborghini Gallardo, which is kind of hilarious considering that car is obviously like insanely good. I guess somebody's gonna have to tell the AI that the Lamborghini might not be the best touring car in the game anymore, because my goodness guys, with this handling update, I really do feel like a lot more cars are going to come out of the pit that they were in before, because they definitely seem to be a lot better. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the 599XX in the comments below, and I really can't wait to see what's going to happen to these other vehicle classes in the game once a lot of these handling updates do hit many of the other cars. But again guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and here are the settings I'm currently running on the 599.